It's the inaugural record release from Discograffiti. Metal Machine Muzak is a slanted tribute to Lou Reed's divisive 1975 double LP Metal Machine Music. Lester Bangs called it the greatest album ever made, but no matter how it hits you, it's always been the ultimate music freak secret handshake. My ambient reimagining features 4 16-minute 1-second tracks, just like the original, and each one was created by a top-shelf indie rock visionary. Lou Barlow from Dinosaur Jr. and Sebadoh, Corey Hansen from Wand, W. Cullen Hart from the Olivia Tremor Control, and Mark Robinson from Unrest. That's right, not a slouch in the bunch, unlike 99% of the compilations you've ever begrudgingly purchased for the one and only band on it you just had to hear. Metal Machine Muzak will not be available on streaming. The digital version is finally available for purchase, and the vinyl will be shipped this summer. Pre-orders for the LPs are available now, but they're going fast. They're being produced in a very limited edition run of 300 numbered 180-gram metallic silver double LP gatefold copies, only 100 of which can be ordered online. These copies will be numbered from 1 to 100, and they're first come, first served. To order either the digital or the vinyl, just head over to patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti/shop. Don't miss out on Metal Machine Muzak, the ambient experience designed to make Brian Eno run screaming. Debbie Boone's attempt to kind of twist the narrative of this song as a paean to God himself is somehow the punchline of this whole thing and makes it one of the sickest cultural in-jokes of all time. And I had no idea up until a couple weeks ago that there was even a background story to all this.
Yeah, well, the song itself is sort of creepy. You know, knowing the backstory now, it's just another layer of ick that's painted over the top of it. Yeah, wow.
Discograffiti presents Queasy Listening. Welcome to Discograffiti, the Music Obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with a brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebroe, and welcome back to our classic Patreon sub-show, Queasy Listening, where we expose ourselves to the world's worst auditory horse shit so we can crawl back to you, loyal listener, and explain not only that it sucks, anyone can do that, but exactly why it sucks so bad. Before we begin, just a reminder that I've endeavored to make Discograffiti my sole source of income, and I support a wife and a wild-ass 5-year-old son exclusively through my work doing this. So if you like what you're hearing, please Venmo me a tip at David-Gebroe. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Debbie Boone's 1977 number one hit for 10 straight torturous weeks, You Light Up My Life, Psst, along with our special guest, Joe Kennedy. Here's just some of the many things Joe and I touch on in this podcast. A mini history of some of the biggest runaway hits of all time, of which this is most certainly up there, the weird, messed up background of its writer and creator, and a seemingly never-ending tale of criminal depravity that'll leave you slack-jawed with disbelief by the end. Coming up, we've got Tom Morello rating the MC5, a career-spanning interview with the Beatles' Pete Best, Robert Schneider rating the Strawberry Alarm Clock, and a massive, many-guested launch into the Beach Boys' entire catalog. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then!
Did I do that right?
Yeah. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Remember this song when it was new? I do.
You couldn't really avoid it. Around that time, I kind of remember, although I believe they were separated by a couple of years, Styx's Babe was ubiquitous.
My memory has a sharp cleave in it in 1978, which was when we moved from the Bronx to Florida. So this is a pre-Florida memory for me. So we were still living in the Bronx. And I remember it very clearly, even though I was over 5. It's at the sort of earliest tail ends of things that I can remember. But man, I sure do remember it.
You really couldn't avoid it. It was all over the friggin' place. And, it was a pretty roundly believed sentiment at one point that music in the 70s was a huge step down from the 60s. I believe that belief has been tailored over time retrospectively. But when you think of bad music in the 70s, thinking of not being able to escape this song in particular is really, I think, what people are referring to now.
Yeah, this is definitely a nadir moment of 70s culture, going on simultaneously as the peak of punk rock.
Right.
So, yeah, we can see there was really something to rebel against. As a song, yes, it's very treacly and very terrible. The arrangement stinks. It's just pure schmaltz.
Dynamically, it's a flat line. Dynamically, it doesn't build to anything. The key changes are, just the whole thing is a Bronx cheer from beginning to end.
Well, if you look at it kind of melodically, it sort of like has a little through line to it. It's not really terribly different from maybe anything that would have been, say, like a contemporary Nashville kind of ballad from the period, right? So what makes it so horrible is its ubiquitousness, right? It's being assaulted with it. If you did not live through the time, it's hard to overstate how much it was in your face at all times. And it's cloyingly catchy. It's terrible and it's treacly, but if you count catchiness as a musical merit, I mean, you have to sort of give it to it, right? It is fucking catchy. It's hard to get it out of your head once you have that earworm in there.
It's a weird kind of catchy, though. It's kind of like Baby Shark.
Well, it's a lot like that.
Yeah.
It's very much like that.
Yeah.
I don't mind Baby Shark.
More for me, I think that it's indicative of a bygone era of my son that he'll never recapture. But as a song, not really wildly blown away by it. You Light Up My Life. Between the two of them, I definitely prefer Baby Shark. But really, this episode is a little bit different from all of the Queasy listening episodes because there's not a whole hell of a lot to say just about this song. This episode is not about the album, Debbie Boone's You Light Up My Life, and it's not about the soundtrack album of the film, You Light Up My Life. It's about the song specifically. Let's first give a little bit of background story on the song because it's well worth diving into this information. This is a ballad written by a guy named Joseph Brooks. It was originally recorded by Casey Sissick for the soundtrack album to a 1977 movie of the same title. The song was lip-synced in the film by its lead actress, a woman named Dee Dee Khan. The best-known cover version of the song, which is the single and the performance that we're talking about, is a cover by Debbie Boone, who's the daughter of the notorious white bread singer Pat Boone. The most famous thing about You Light Up My Life is that it held the number one position on the Billboard Hot 100 chart for 10 consecutive weeks in 1977 and topped Record World Magazine's Top 100 Singles chart for a record 13 weeks. It was the most popular, most successful song of the 1970s.
Yes, it was the most successful single of the 1970s. That is correct.
So Sissick's original soundtrack recording was included in the film's soundtrack album, then was later released as a single to bolster sales of the soundtrack album after Debbie Boone included her version on her very first solo album, which was also called You Light Up My Life. Although the soundtrack album went gold and peaked at number 17 on Billboard, it never included Debbie Boone's hit single version of the song. After the success of Debbie Boone's version, the song earned Joseph Brooks a Grammy Award for Song of the Year, an Academy Award for Best Original Song, a Golden Globe Award for Best Original Song, and an American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers Award, which is ASCAP. That's a hell of a lot of acclaim. The original recording of You Light Up My Life, done by Sissick, was released on Arista Records after Debbie Boone's version went wildly batshit crazy, and within less than 3 weeks, the soundtrack album went gold and made it one of the fastest breaking records in Arista's history at that time.
Quick question before we move on from all the accolades it received. Is this the worst thing ever to win an Academy Award?
That would require some thought on my part, but it's got to be up there.
Kind of a rhetorical question, but just throwing that out there.
Keep in mind,
is this the worst Academy Award ever issued?
I mean, it's still sitting somewhere. So Debbie Boone's single sold 5 million copies. It was the biggest hit of the 70s.
That's a lot for a single.
Let's talk about the enormity of its success relative to other songs that are ridiculously successful. Elvis Presley's double-sided hit, Don't Be Cruel, and Hound Dog had been recognized as the longest-running number one song of the rock era. It spent 11 weeks on top of Billboard in 56 before the 1958 debut of the Hot 100. The previous Hot 100 record was held by Mac the Knife by Bobby Darin.
Keep in mind, at this time of doing the charts, a lot fewer records are coming out. So it's a little bit easier to dominate the chart when there's less competition.
Right. And so the massive songs that are kind of breathing the same rarefied air are Mac the Knife, Percy Faith's recording of Theme from a Summer Place, and the Beatles' Hey Jude, all of which remained at number one for 9 weeks. The 10-week record was matched in 1982 by Olivia Newton-John's Physical, but wasn't surpassed until a 1991 change in chart methodology, which allowed songs to achieve longer reigns at number one, and that was Boyz II Men's End of the Road. I'm not judging or rating any of this, just looking at lengths of enormous success. So Boone's You Light Up My Life single topped Record World's Top 100 for an unbroken record of 13 weeks.
I can't think of any other song in my lifetime that achieved that level of ubiquity. Now, keep in mind, I'm only 5 years old at the time. I can't really think of anything else that saturated the culture that much where you just could not escape it like that.
Yeah, and I remember, going in the car with my parents. I was 5 years old as well. And you start up the car, and every time you did that, it would be, like the key change part of the song where Debbie Boone would be like proselytizing to the back row every single time. And one thing I want to say, which, in the sort of harsh glare of what was to come later, brings a whole different meaning to the whole thing. Although it was written by Joseph Brooks as a straight up love song, Debbie Boone was a devout Christian, and she interpreted it and sang it as an inspirational song and proclaimed that instead it was God who lit up her life.
Somehow made it suck more. Has that Christian stink on it, like Christian rock stink on it.
Yeah, exactly. One thing before we take a left onto something else here, there's tons of different cover versions of this thing. There's one that's worth mentioning that is mind-blowing, and I don't know if you saw it, and you can find it on YouTube. There was an ABC show called Kids Are People Too.
Yeah, I know this.
And Patti Smith performs the song with Joseph Brooks on piano.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
She kind of desecrates it, but I guess she's also
kind of doing it. She has reverence for the thing.
She's kind of doing it straight, but also she's Patti Smith, so it just comes out like a desecration of it.
She's not making fun of it, though.
She's not making fun of it, but it still does come out. It's interesting.
It's a what the fuck.
I advise you to watch it out there. It's worth checking out.
So that's all the, the stuff on the up and up. That's all the thumbs up stuff about this song.
That's all the good stuff.
That's all the good stuff. Now let's go a little deeper here. So the woman who initially recorded it, Casey Sissick, her second husband, Ed Rakowitz, he wrote that Joseph Brooks was initially pretty pleased with her recording of the song, which appeared, of course, in the movie and on the soundtrack, but tried to evade paying her by making false promises and asking her to be just like a walk-on actor in the movie, just like a cameo, and implied that there'd be huge rewards just around the bend if she was, just like an extra in the movie. And then Rakowitz claimed that Joseph Brooks made advances towards Sissick, and after being rebuffed and her not playing into his hand, he refused to speak directly to her again and decided to commission a whole separate recording with Debbie Boone. That's how Debbie Boone comes into play here, because Casey Sissick wouldn't sleep with him. And what Debbie Boone said was that she had absolutely no freedom whatsoever. Here, I'll quote her. "I had no freedom whatsoever. Joe told me exactly how to sing it and imitate every inflection from the original recording." So this is an Academy Award-winning song that she was instructed to just copycat.
Yeah, every little inflection had to be the same.
Right. And Joe, tell us why.
Well, it's because, if I have this correct, which I believe I do, is that she sang over the original track, which still had bleed on it from the other vocal. So it had to cover up and mask any bleed that was left behind on, whatever open track they were recording Debbie Boone's vocal on.
Right. And so the subtext of that is that this song that wound up being this cherished classic and, an evergreen, he didn't find that it was necessary or even worth re-recording the backing track. Right. So he used what really was an affected, trashy backing track. It's kind of like garbage. Because of the vocal bleed, all you're doing is masking a song length mistake with another vocal.
Yeah, obviously it's the kind of thing now you would do with AI, right? You would just AI it right out of there. They wouldn't have that problem.
Right.
But so the solution then was they would have to, make sure the original was masked by her singing exactly, which, kind of what's the point of all of it, I guess, right?
Joseph Brooks, maybe at that point, he was thinking like an investor, maybe, and he was an investor. We'll get to that. But he didn't want to pay to re-record the piano and orchestra again.
Right. Also, Debbie Boone was not a name, right? She was just
Debbie Boone had not released a record yet. This was her debut solo record. So she didn't have any wiggle room in the negotiation over this. And Sissick later got a lawyer and sued Brooks for the fees that she had rightfully earned for her work on the record and for credit on the soundtrack, and she did later win. Let's talk about Joseph Brooks. So Joseph Brooks, born Joseph Kaplan in March 1938. He was a composer, a director, a producer, a screenwriter, and a raconteur because he's that good. He was a prolific writer, mainly of advertising jingles. Mm-hmm. And he wrote, besides You Light Up My Life, he wrote some other songs, that would wind up having a little bit of success. He grew up in Manhattan and in Long Island, started playing piano at age 3 and writing plays at age 5 after his parents got divorced. He also developed a stutter as a kid, and according to a production partner of his, it would only disappear when Brooks sang or acted. He later went to 5 different colleges, including Juilliard, but didn't graduate from any of them. In the late 50s, he pursued a career as a singer-songwriter, wound up releasing a few albums on the Canadian-American label as Joey Brooks, and on Decca as Joey Brooks and the Baroque Folk. And when his singing career tanked, he kind of drifted into advertising with only the occasional songwriter work, but sporadically would release a few more records throughout the 60s and 70s. He wound up writing jingles that are famous to this day, including You've Got a Lot to Live for Pepsi, and especially Good to the Last Drop Feeling for Maxwell House, and received a ton of Clio awards for his work, as well as a People's Choice Award. He also wrote, if you know the Walker Brothers' top 10 UK hit in 1966, My Ship Is Coming In, he wrote that. That's a pretty cool song. By his 30s, Joe was very wealthy. I think he was a millionaire by that point, but he hadn't achieved the same level of fame that his ads had or that his music had. Nobody knew who he was. And he also didn't have the type of fame and notoriety that he wanted. He didn't want to be known for his ads. So he attempted to woo Hollywood with an increasingly bizarre series of very fucked up, weird films. At first, they were not maybe bluntly fucked up and weird. Then they just got more and more so. So in the 70s, Brooks, who at one point claimed to have 150 commercials on the air, started composing for films. He wrote music for The Garden of the Finzi Continis in 1970, Marjo in 1972, and The Lords of Flatbush in 74, which he also invested in. Then in the mid-70s, did you know he had a relationship with Cindy Williams?
Yeah, I read that.
I thought that was a little bit weird. From Laverne and Shirley. And at the time, she was starring in the movie The First Nudie Musical. Have you ever seen that?
I haven't seen it. Wasn't she also kind of a big Broadway actress at the time? I feel like?
Yeah. And she was Andy Kaufman's girlfriend.
Right.
I saw The First Nudie Musical when I was in my early teens. I found this guy who did a mail order thing with VHS bootlegs. I had heard of this thing and it sounded pretty crazy. It's not an erotic film. It's just weird and corny. Brooks was an investor in the movie. And so Joseph Brooks originally planned for Cindy Williams to star in You Light Up My Life, but he was having relationship issues with her. And, he broke up with her before the film was made, which is why the role went to Didi Khan. And then You Light Up My Life. Hi, I'm Dave Gebroe. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 4-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate podcast for music obsessives thrive. Now I need your help. Although Discograffiti is rated in the top 2% of all podcasts globally, the economics of this thing are tricky. Becoming a member of Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to over 100 more exclusive episodes. And moving forward now every Sunday for only $5 a month as a private first class, you get our new weekly show by and for Discograffiti's Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a lieutenant, you get an ad-free, substantially elongated director's cut of every episode. And you'll be getting the shows a few days earlier than the general populace, which is designed to make you feel even more special than you already are. So when you become a major, you'll be getting access to the ultimate director's cuts of all our sprawling, super deep dive episodes. As far as I'm concerned, these super cuts have absolutely everything that was meant to be heard. Plus, you get yours before the lieutenants get theirs. But that ain't it. You also get all our other series, like Discograffiti's Top 10, our buried treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our slag-off show, Queasy Listening, and exclusive limited series like The Private Press with Paul Major. And if you've got no financial worries to speak of, keep in mind that some of the higher Patreon tiers allow you to actually advertise on the show, choose the bands we cover, or even some of the guests we get. For the price of a cup of coffee a week, you can ensure my family's fed, build a music library that'll be the envy of your block, and connect to a thriving community of music maniacs all at the same time. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Patreon.com/Discograffiti. Once again, that's Patreon.com/Discograffiti. 1977, he writes, directs, scores, and finances You Light Up My Life. But one of the film's actors, Stephen Nathan, says that he really didn't know what the hell he was doing. He was an egomaniac. This brings to mind, I remember reading Easy Rider's Raging Bulls, and the book was referring to Easy Rider as a movie that sort of was directed not by Dennis Hopper, because if you go and see the last movie, you realize this guy can't direct his way out of a paper bag. So it was like the zeitgeist that directed Easy Rider, using Dennis Hopper as sort of as a channel. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of believe You Light Up My Life. He got lucky. It's like somehow it worked. I never saw the movie. Did you see it?
No, I read about it, and it seems like a pretty straightforward 70s drama that's not very good. Although it was, I guess, somewhat successful. Yeah,
it was massively successful. I mean, it cost approximately $1 million. It was about Didi Khan, who plays an aspiring singer, and very by rote, it becomes a box office success despite massively poor reviews.
She's like a singer, and she has to make a choice between a relationship and a career. And that's just very by the numbers. Not interesting. Right. Not an interesting story by any means.
The song is not remembered because of the movie. The movie, people forget there was even a movie behind it.
Right.
It just happened to be from a movie.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that fact about it too.
Now, here's, for me, where things start to get really weird. So Brooks was riding high at this point. He's got all these awards on his mantelpiece now. And so people are asking him what's next. He attempts to follow up his success with a similarly styled romantic drama called If Ever I See You Again in 1978. And Brooks not only co-writes, produces, directs, and scores, but now he plays the leading man.
Right. In a Tommy Wiseauian move.
Right. And there's so many connective threads to Tommy Wiseau here. And he actually plays a successful composer of TV commercial jingles with dreams of breaking into Hollywood. So now he's lost all his imagination and is just writing straight from the script of his life. He's had no prior acting experience really to speak of. Somehow the title song squeaks by and becomes a moderate hit for Roberta Flack, peaks at number 24, but the movie is a total bomb, gets crazy bad reviews. Did you see any of this on YouTube?
I watched a little bit of, I flipped through it a little bit. I couldn't get through a whole lot of it.
So for any of you out there, you got to check out this 10-minute super mix on YouTube. It's batshit crazy. For fans of The Room, you'll absolutely love it. It's the kind of thing where every line of dialogue has the other character's name in it. It's like if I was to end every sentence with saying Joe at the end of it. It's so unbelievable that this is a guy who swept every award, 1 year previous to this. So subsequently, Brooks is involved in a few other movies, including co-producing Eddie and the Cruisers, which, by the way, I've never seen. Have you seen that?
I haven't. It's supposed to be pretty good, right?
Yeah. Well, I remember Ebert gave it 2.5 stars. That correlates with pretty good. So yes, Brooks didn't score that. And in the late 90s, I love this fact, Joseph Brooks and his then wife, Christina Bone, began developing a film called Sarah's Life before it became a movie, which was never released. I love that title. That title is a title for a movie that will never be released. There's no way a movie called that will be released.
You're not going to see that on a marquee.
No. And Brooks also worked on stage productions. He composed and wrote for the 1989 musical adaptation of Metropolis. And he wrote, directed, and produced the Broadway musical In My Life in 2005, which is a love story about, okay, are you ready for this? Did you look into this?
No, I don't know about this. I'm intrigued.
This is about a female Village Voice personals editor with obsessive compulsive disorder and a musician with Tourette's syndrome who are brought together by a jingle singing god.
That sounds like it was like a Mad Libs. Sounds like a Mad Libs.
Exactly. So Robert Simonson later wrote that In My Life was generally regarded as one of the strangest shows ever to have graced a Broadway stage. I wish to God I'd seen it. So here's what happened. It was roundly panned. The New York Times called it jaw-dropping moments of whimsy run amok. And Joseph Brooks...
That sounds actually kind of good.
It does.
That's actually kind of nice.
Brooks spent $1.5 million on ads just saying that the critics were wrong. You gotta love that. His career in 2008 was curtailed by a stroke. Okay, here's where the thing really starts to wilt on the vine, as it were.
In case you're feeling bad about his stroke.
In case you're feeling that yeah, exactly. So in June 2009, Joseph Brooks was arrested on charges of raping or sexually assaulting 11 women, aspiring actresses and singers, all of them, who he lured to his East Side, New York apartment from 2005 to 2008. He had a female assistant named Shawnee Lucier, who was charged with helping him. Authorities said he had the 42-year-old female assistant actually help him select his victims. And Lucier posted mainly Craigslist ads, but also on several casting websites, and lured about 50 women in total to bogus auditions for a non-existent film over the course of those several years, specifying only women under 21 need apply and that there would be nude scenes in the roles. Lucier would ask for full body shots in advance so that Joe Brooks could examine the merchandise. Keep in mind, this is a 71-year-old man. Mm-hmm. And the ads would say, we are looking to have someone who we want to turn into a star. Joe Brooks had convinced his victims to take off their clothes on his personal casting couch. And police said that when they needed an extra push, he would pull out his You Light Up My Life Oscar and put it in their hands. He would say, this could be you. This could be you holding the Oscar. I could make you a star. That's what Lieutenant Adam Lamboy quoted Brooks as saying. He primarily targeted victims from Washington State and Oregon, including former American Idol contestant Loretta Spruill, who was from Seattle. And the reason was that they'd be tired from traveling by the time they arrived in New York. And he allegedly hoped that would leave them without the energy to put up a fight. He would tell all these women that they were trying out for the role of a prostitute, and the scene that they were depicting involved drinking glasses of wine repeatedly and quickly. And obviously, it's also likely that the wine was drugged. He told them to be very comfortable with their bodies, to drink the wine and feel sexy about themselves as they became more and more intoxicated. The assistant persisted as Brooks's procurer, even as she watched young women leave the quote-unquote auditions in disheveled hysterics. And even after some of the women emailed her, begging her not to let Brooks harm anyone else. So the chief of the district's attorney sex crimes unit, named Lisa Friel, said she picked the victims, set up travel arrangements, and reassured them. At times, she said Miss Lucier also reassured mothers who were worried about sending their daughters alone to New York on flights that were paid for by Mr. Brooks. And she said that the assistant was sometimes present in the apartment when the women arrived, but left right before the assaults, just like what we heard happening with Harvey Weinstein, who I believe was doing all this kind of bullshit concurrently. Brooks was indicted.
Now, Weinstein actually had the ability to make or break you, though. This guy's pretty much a nobody. He's making weird Broadway bombs. He's old and a little bit different. Weinstein actually had the juice.
Right.
This guy is just putting on the front of having the juice.
And if you see him from this time, he looks gaunt. He looks creepy. He definitely, he's mostly in the pictures that I've seen kind of sporting the Kubrick stare. He's looking, unwell, unhealthily. He's had a stroke. He's looking underfed, malnourished. He wound up being indicted on June 23rd, 2009, and was to be tried in the state Supreme Court for Manhattan on 91 counts of rape, sexual abuse, criminal sexual act, assault, and other charges.
Now, let's not forget, too, he wouldn't have been able to do probably any of this without that stupid, shitty, fucking horrible song poisoning everybody's ears 30 years prior,
Right. And keep in mind, this is, supposedly an inspirational song about God. Now, that, of course, wasn't his intent. To protect Joseph Brooks's honor. So in December 2009, the prosecutors indicated that they would ask the grand jury to consider adding even more charges, in part because all these additional victims had come forward. The indictment kept ballooning until it actually reached 127 counts and included 13 victims ranging in age from 18 to 30. Unfortunately for the trial to come, Brooks committed suicide on May 22nd, 2011, before he could be tried. 3 days after he died, Shawnee Lucier pleaded guilty to 10 counts of criminal facilitation. Brooks took a plastic bag, put it over his head, and attached a hose to it near a helium tank, and asphyxiated himself by helium. The suicide note, so Joseph Brooks claimed in the note that he was innocent and that the suicide had nothing to do with the charges that were pending against him, but complained about his failing health and a 22-year-old ex-fiancée that he was in the process of suing, on whom he claimed he'd spent $2 million before learning she was already married. So apparently he was heartbroken. Now, as a side note, Brooks was married 4 times. In the late 70s, Brooks had married a woman named Susan Paul, an English model and actress who was in the movie All That Jazz. They had 2 children during the 80s and were divorced by the early 90s. One of those kids was a son named Nicholas, who was born in 1986. At the time of Brooks's death, Joseph's son, Nicholas, he was about 6 months deep in a relationship with Sylvie Cachet. Sylvie Cachet was a Peruvian-American swimsuit designer who had worked as a designer for both Marc Jacobs and Tommy Hilfiger, and then joined Victoria's Secret's design team and became their head swimsuit designer. She worked there until 2006 and then started her own line of swimsuits, Sila. She was really successful. Sports Illustrated featured her designs in their swimsuit video. Cachet met Nicholas Brooks in June 2010. Brooks was struggling to remain employed at this point. He's smoking a lot of weed. He had dropped out of college. On their first date, they wound up bonding because one of Sylvie's poodles was hit by a car on this date and killed. He stayed with her all night and was really sweet, apparently. Their relationship was really volatile. It was a 6-month relationship. They kept breaking up, making amends, getting back together. On December 9th, 2010, Cachet and Nicholas Brooks arrive at the Soho House Hotel at about 12:30 a.m. Cachet explains to the clerk at the front desk that her stoner boyfriend had accidentally set fire to their apartment after leaving lit candles behind the bed while he was high on drugs. they were able to put out the fire, but apparently it was all smoky. She also tells the clerk that she was tired and she's kind of slurring her speech a little bit because she'd taken a Xanax. A concierge is appointed to assist her to room 20. The concierge later recounts, and by the way, I'm giving very specific information. I'm sure there's butterflies in everyone's stomachs right now, and for all the right reasons. The concierge later recounts that as she leaves the room, she hears Cachet and Brooks arguing. Around 2 a.m., the hotel staff gets multiple complaints of water dripping through the floor of room 20. They knock on the door. Nobody answers. They let themselves in the room, and there they discover Sylvie Cachet's body submerged in an overflowing bathtub. She's wearing nothing but a turtleneck sweater, pink underwear, and a Rolex watch. And despite efforts to revive her, paramedics pronounce her dead on the scene at 3:33 a.m. The police examine her body and find wounds on her neck that are consistent with strangulation, and there was also hemorrhaging in her eyes and a bite mark on her hand. So at the time of Joe Brooks' suicide, his son Nicholas was awaiting trial in New York City for the murder of Sylvie Cachet. On July 11th, 2013, Nicholas was convicted of Cachet's murder and was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison on September 23rd, 2013. And all of this somehow flowed out from one of the most popular songs of all time and one of the worst, most grating, cloying, and hysterically overdramatic songs of all time. It's unbelievable that all of it flowed from the song. I mean,
it's true. It wouldn't have all happened without it.
Obviously, Debbie's attempt to see the song as a paean to God is somehow the punchline to this whole thing and makes it one of the most convoluted and bizarre, sick jokes of all time in the music industry.
It truly is.
And that is the legacy of You Light Up My Life. This is not a normal sort of Queasy listening episode, but it's something that I was previously unaware of, and I seriously cannot believe that that's the background story behind the most successful song of the 1970s and one of the most successful songs of all time. It's also oddly a statement on how even if you do get the level of success that you've been pursuing, that your own perspective on how it's either the right or wrong kind of success that you're experiencing can actually fuck you up. You know, Joseph Brooks was not okay with being successful just in the advertising realm. It just was never enough. And you see the guy, the pictures of when he was in his 70s and doing all that fucked up shit, and he looked like, you know, the phrase hungry ghost from Leonard Cohen. Of course, obviously, then Debbie Boone's attempt to kind of twist the narrative of this song right there at the beginning as a paean to God himself is somehow the punchline of this whole thing and makes it one of the sickest cultural in-jokes of all time. And I had no idea up until a couple weeks ago that there was even a background story to all this.
Yeah, well, the song itself is sort of creepy, you know, like it's a sort of, it has such a sickly sweet thing to it to begin with that it's already on the cloying end of creepy, disturbing. You know, knowing the backstory now, it's just another layer of ick that's painted over the top of it. Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
It's really something.
It is a wow. It's beyond disturbing. Yeah. You know, I know plenty of real sick stories in the annals of rock history, and this is way up there. And I don't know how I never found out about it because I naturally gravitate toward this kind of bizarre, disturbing stuff. But there you have it. This is a Queasy on a different level, folks.
This truly is maybe the queasiest of them all.
It's Queasy with a twist. All right, that about does it. If you enjoyed this episode, then Venmo Gebroe. Come on, Venmo Gebroe at David-GEBROE. Please keep in mind this is entirely how I support my wife and 5-year-old son, so don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Venmo me a tip at David-Gebroe. Okay, here's the week up ahead. This Sunday, our weekly show within a show, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast, drops for our Patreon's private tier. These are real people with talent and a burning fire deep inside, just like you and I. Then come Monday, the early release ad-free ultimate cut of part 1 of the Beatles' Pete Best rolls out for our major tier. It's the show as it was truly intended to be heard, with all the essentials left intact. And then on Wednesday, the Lieutenant tier gets their edit, and although not quite as long as the major cut, it's still ad-free and a heck of a lot longer than the publicly available cut. And then come Friday, the rest of you penny pinchers get to join in on the action. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Joe Kennedy, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. Speaking of friends, it's high time for some new ones. They're in our Facebook group, Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound. That's the best way to find out what's coming up on the show, but there's a hell of a lot more. You get recaps of the day in music history, the ability to pitch questions to guests, polls that put you in the driver's seat on guest and band decisions, and access to a thriving creative hub if you're looking for a collaborator. So make sure you don't miss out. You can find the link to the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound Facebook page right there in the show notes. And if you don't mess with the Zuck, no sweat. Just email me at info@discograffiti.com and I'll keep you in the loop. And of course, be sure to mark your calendars, because next Friday, August 30th, we're coming at you with Pete Best from the Beatles. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss it. And so, from now till then, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!